Welcome back to my channel. Today in this episode we are covering one of the most misjudged sections of the strategic case study. Many students skim this part, assume it is technical background and move on. And that is a mistake. CIMA spent several pages explaining different types of EVs even though Cewmlator manufactures only battery electric vehicles, and that is not accidental. This section is not about vehicle engineering. It is all about strategic positioning, substitution risk, and market transition. If you understand why this section exists, your answers immediately move into the top scoring band. Let's be very clear about why CIMA included this section. CIMA is doing two things at the same time. First, it is educating you about substitution technologies. Second, it is testing whether you understand that markets rarely transition in a clean, linear way. Students who simply describe BEVs, PHEVs, HEVs, and MHEVs are answering the wrong question. The real question is, what does the existence of these alternatives mean for demand, competition, and risk for a BEV-only manufacturer like Cewmlator? And that is the examiner mindset. The Parisian categorizes electric vehicles into four types: battery electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, hybrid electric vehicles, and mild hybrid electric vehicles. These are not four steps on a straight road, they are competing solutions to the same problem: reducing emissions. Each with different costs, different conveniences, and different adoption barriers. And this is critical. If multiple solutions coexist, no single technology dominates quickly. That insight is at the heart of this section. Let's start with BEVs. Battery electric vehicles are powered entirely by electricity. They use large rechargeable batteries which can be charged at home or via public charging points and produce zero emission while driving. They are also mechanically simpler than internal combustion engine vehicles. This is the technology Cewmlator has chosen to commit to completely. From a strategy perspective, that choice creates clarity and focus, but clarity does not mean safety. The Parisian is unusually honest about BEV weaknesses. First, range anxiety. Even though many journeys are short, customers worry about running out of charge. Second, charging dependency. If charging infrastructure is weak or inconvenient, BEVs lose appeal quickly. Third, recovery risk. The Parisian explicitly states that BEVs are difficult to recover if the battery is depleted because they cannot be towed. Fourth, battery degradation. Heavy batteries degrade over time, reducing range and resale value. And this is not a technical trivia. This is CIMA giving you explicit adoption risk. Imagine a customer living in a rural area with limited charging capacity or infrastructure, for example. Even if 90% of their journeys are short, the risk of remaining 10% dominate their decision. From the customer's perspective, rejecting a BEV is rational, but from the Cewmlator's perspective, this is lost demand. Now let's look at plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. PHEVs combine an electric motor with an internal combustion engine. They can drive short distances using battery power alone, which often covers daily commuting. For longer journeys, the vehicle switches to petrol or diesel. Importantly, the PHEVs can be recharged using plug-in charging just like BEVs. Strategically, PHEVs exist to reduce behavioral friction. They allow customers to change gradually, not abruptly. PHEVs reduce range anxiety and lower adoption barriers. They appeal to customers who are willing to experiment with electric driving but are not ready to commit fully. However, the pre-scene is clear about the downsides. PHEVs are heavier and more complex and still rely on fossil fuels. They also require customers to maintain two systems, which is electric and ICE. However, Cewmlator deliberately rejected this compromise. This tells you something very important. Cewmlator is prioritizing strategic purity over demand flexibility. A competitor offering both BEVs and PHEVs can smooth revenue during the slow adoption periods. Cewmlator cannot, and that increases upside and downside. Hybrid electric vehicles operate differently. They use petrol or diesel engines to generate electricity and cannot be plugged in. The batteries are smaller and cannot power the vehicle independently. Emissions are lower than traditional ICE vehicles, but they are not zero emissions. Strategically, HEVs are about efficiency, not transformation. They reduce fuel use without forcing customers to change behavior. HEVs appeal to risk-averse consumers. They also appeal in markets where charging infrastructure is weak or unreliable. From a strategy perspective, HEVs slow down the transition. They allow customers to feel environmentally responsible without changing their habits. And that matters enormously. Markets do not adopt technology based on logic alone. They adopt it when convenience outweighs the inconvenience. Mild hybrid electric vehicles push this even further. They use electric motors only to assist ICE engines. They cannot operate on electricity alone. Energy is recovered through regenerative braking, and CIMA subtly questions whether MHEVs should even be classified as electric vehicles. That is not accidental. This slide contains one of the most important examiner signals in the entire pre-scene. If MHEVs are counted as ICE vehicles, non-electric cars still dominate registrations. In other words, statistics can exaggerate progress. This is CIMA testing whether you understand the difference between regulatory classification, economic reality, consumer behaviors. And high-scoring candidates always question headline numbers. CGMA wants you to see three things very clearly. First, BEVs are not the only credible solution. Second, hybrid technologies reduce switching pressure. Third, the transition away from ICE is fragmented, not binary. This weakens the assumption that BEVs will dominate quickly, and that assumption is dangerous in the exam. One of the most common failure in the strategic case study scripts is the sentences, for example, BEVs will inevitably replace ICE vehicles. The pre-scene directly contradicts this. It explicitly states that demand for ICE vehicles remain high and that EV demand is not yet strong enough to force early replacement. When CIMA gives you that sentence, it is not background, it is instruction. By producing only BEVs, Cewmlator achieves strong sustainability differentiation, simplified manufacturing, and alignment with long-term regulations. But it also increases exposure to adoption delays, infrastructure gaps, and substitution by hybrids. And this is high conviction strategy, not a conservative one. High conviction strategies amplify the outcomes. When conditions are favorable, returns accelerate. When assumptions fail, downside accelerates just as fast. CIMA rewards candidates who recognize this asymmetry. Neutral answers score average marks, balanced, risk-averse, judgmental answer scores high marks always. In the exam, this section support answers on competitive threat, market dynamics, strategic risk, product portfolio decisions, and high scoring sentence might sound like BEV vehicles align with long-term regulatory trends, hybrid technologies reduce short-term switching pressure and increase demand volatility of BEV-only manufacturers such as Cewmlator. And that is not theory, that is pre-seen applied. CIMA tells you explicitly, ICE vehicles still account for a large share of registrations, especially when MHEVs are classified as ICE. This is the examiner telling you one thing. Do not overestimate the speed of change. Candidates who miss this sentence will miss the mark. In the next episode, we move into the customer economics, purchase price, range anxiety, charge